What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we have our second part of our post-Grudge match interview. I'm joined today by Cate Hall. Cate, how's it going?
Hey, good. Happy to be here.
Great. Thank you for joining us today. And we're going to be going through the Grudge match itself, some other issues going on in poker. But before we do that, I quickly want to say I am going to be streaming tomorrow on Twitch at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Back in the mix on Twitch. Been a little bit of a hiatus, but if you want to stop by, hang out, feel free to do so tomorrow at dougpolk.tv at 2 p.m. Pacific time. All right. So, Cate, I think people that are kind of in the know in poker, certainly on Twitter in poker, they're familiar with you, right, from the match and all kinds of different stuff. So, for the people that are maybe a little more casual here, that are just stopping by, check this out. Can you give us a little bit of your background, a little bit about you? Just a little rundown about yourself.
Yeah, I grew up in Arizona, came out east to go to law school, became a lawyer, practiced law for like 6 years, and then a year and a half ago left that job to play poker full time after playing like on weekends for about a year and a half before that. So relatively new to the poker scene, but also very happy to be a part of the poker scene and not the regular job scene anymore.
I feel that, having been in poker for something like a decade myself, I think I see a lot of people that are kind of at the stage in their poker career where they're moving on to other things. I look at kind of my group of friends at least, and me and Ryan Fee started a training site. Still in the poker space, obviously, but a little bit different. Some of my friends like Jason Moe got more into like the cryptocurrency kind of stuff, and you basically I feel like a lot of my friends are kind of going in different directions now. So I think it surprises a lot of people to see someone that you had a great job beforehand and then go from that into poker for the freedom. You know, why do you value the freedom more like that? What made you decide that you wanted to make that transition?
Um, I think I was just really unhappy being a lawyer, and I felt like I was wasting my life doing something that bored me, and I just didn't want to get to the end of my life and have a bunch of money, but not have really enjoyed my life at all. Um, so poker was like a way out of that for me. And I I understand why there are a lot of people moving away from poker now, and I don't think it's like a very good career choice in general right now. But it was like a way for me to have a couple of years to do something that I enjoyed before moving on to something else. So,
Okay, gotcha. And that's totally fair. Probably not quite as many heads up grudge matches in the legal field compared to the poker field, at least these days. So you never know. All right, so let's kind of get into talking about what happened here, because we talked a little bit with Mike a couple days ago. Excuse me. Talked a little bit with Mike a couple days ago, and he seemed to have certain thoughts on the way that this beef originally started. From your perspective, what happened to kind of get this going? Like what was the original moment where things started to go down as far as you and Mike?
um, there had been like a lot, sorry,
It's okay.
a lot, my voice is going. There'd been a lot leading up to it in the sense that he had been sort of sporadically attacking my play on Twitter for over a year leading up to this. I remember when I played the five diamond, the same tournament that this happened at the year before, he'd been at my table and had been tweeting uh, false and histories trying to show that I was a bad player. Um, and there was, as I'm sure a lot of people know, there was a big hand at the Bellagio Five Diamond this year that I played poorly, and I went on Twitter and I said, I played this big hand. I was wrong, and I realized it's going to look really stupid. And sort of tried to like get in front of it because people really like to criticize my play, and I realized how bad it would look. And still after that, he was like on Twitter mocking me, which just felt like, you know, at the point where I'm on Twitter saying I played this hand badly, you don't need to come in and say, "Oh, you're so stupid. You played this hand badly." It's just like pointless.
Yeah.
And because I like played with him a bunch before and hadn't been impressed by his play, I just felt like, you know, this is a way to like make him shut up. Like if he wanted to actually put his money where his mouth was, he could keep speaking, and if he didn't, he should stop talking. So that was kind of that's how it got started.
That's totally fair. You know, I when I first saw the whole thing go down, it was pretty ridiculous. In terms of just like you both were definitely attacking each other. There was a lot of the word bitch getting thrown around. I think I saw like, I don't know, 10 of those. And you know, from talking with Mike, he really felt like, you know, Mike's analogy he made was calling a man a bitch is like calling a woman a cunt, and I don't know if I really agree with that. But to Mike, he was really, you know, he felt disrespected by that, and I guess that's like one of the reasons why he wanted to, like, you know, stick up for himself. I assume something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't like the way that I handled it. You know, I think that I learned something from that experience just because it ended up being this whole nasty fight that stretched out over months, and it wasn't really good for me or for anybody else. So I think that in the future I'll try to avoid those situations. But like my responses to him and the way, like the tone that I took with him, it was disrespectful, but it was in response to like a year-long history of him insulting me and me never responding. So it was kind of just like pent up frustration from all of that.
I gotcha. All right, so after that, you guys decided to have this match, you know, on Poker Night in America, and now something that gets brought up like a decent amount that I've seen, people claiming that you said that you were not going to get coaching, and then you did take the upswing heads up course, you know, to try and improve your heads up play. Which, you know, personally, I think that if I accepted a match in anything, I would do my best to get coaching, because I want to be good in the game that we're going to be playing in front of thousands of people, right? So I guess my question is, you know, did you say that, and then furthermore, let's talk a little bit about the actual like training itself, like, you know, what your experiences were like with the upswing course.
Okay, well, just to take the first question first, Joey Joe Ingram asked me on his podcast whether I was going to get a coach for the match, and I said no. I think I might have also said this in another interview. And like, I understood the question to be, will you be hiring somebody to like coach you one-on-one to prepare you for the match? And the answer to that was no. I certainly didn't think that included like watching videos or preparing in any way. Because I think it would be kind of insane to not attempt to prepare for the match in some way. And I was pretty shocked that Mike didn't seem to have done that.
Which, you know, definitely a good situation for you.
Yeah,
You know,
for
like
sure.
I made the analogy, and it's obviously different in some ways, but I made the analogy with Mike. You know, if like let's say you had an MMA fight and one person trains and one person doesn't, you know, um, you'd be at a pretty huge disadvantage.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you know, I don't think that there's really any shame in, like, you know, neither one of you guys are heads up experts. In fact, I don't really know how much heads up either of you had played. You know, Mike had played some, not really sure how much that, you know, how much he played. but neither one of you are heads up experts or have that much familiarity, with the format. So why would it be, I don't see why it would be bad to train. Like, for
Right.
example, like if someone challenged me to heads up Badugi and I accepted it, I'd probably learn the rules of Badugi. I would learn like the strategies and how to play. So yeah, I think that, trying to prepare for something that's going to be watched by a lot of people and is for, a good amount of money, that makes sense.
Yeah, and my like beating Mike was a big goal of mine, but it wasn't the only goal. I also like want to be able to sell action for big tournaments in the future. And if I showed up and played like absolute trash, it would have been hard to do that.
Yeah, it's fair.
Nobody wants to buy my action for like a 25K if I just play like trash after having a couple of months to prepare for it.
I do think though that it's a little dangerous. Well, that's true. I think it's a little dangerous to start worrying too much about that at all points because, the thing about being a poker player in terms of selling action, you're kind of like always being watched. If you have a bad hand, it's going to make its way around. That's the way the poker community is.
Yeah.
I always see like, oh, you're not going to believe this hand somebody played. And I guess maybe I'm at the point in my career where I just like kind of just don't give a shit that much anymore. Although sometimes there are pretty outstanding hands. But the way the poker community works, like if you have a bad hand, it's going to be everywhere and everyone's going to know it. But the thing is, if you get too hung up on not having that happen, where you're just like you're just trying to like not look bad, then I think that you're not maybe doing some of the things that you need to do to try and win the most money. So
Yeah.
I guess I would just say that while you're right, it's important to try and look good in that way. I think becoming too focused on that is a definite drawback within your game.
I mean, that was sort of my point with the whole ace 10 hand. And what I said about it after the fact on Twitter was like, it was a bad play. But like, I did my best in the hand. And I tried to make what I thought was the right play. I was mistaken. But like, having people, there's like a ring of spectators, like a few people deep, and the cameras rolling and like lights on and stuff. It would have been really easy for me to just like fold that hand, like knowing that I was going to look like a total asshole if I
Yeah.
was wrong, and I was wrong. But I feel like kind of proud of the hand in the sense that I had the nerve, I guess, to try to play,
Yeah.
try to make the right play, even though I knew it was going to look bad.
Yeah, I mean, like, just not to go too much into strategy here on this, but if you are going to have like a back raising range there, it should probably include hands that are a little stronger than ace 10 as bluffs. If you're planning on having a flat and back raise. So personally, I think the hand was bad, and I just like try to make sure to just say like how I actually feel. Like, I told Mike 2 days ago, I said, Mike, like, Cate played a better strategy than you, straight up. So I try to just keep it real, and yeah, that hand wasn't very good. But the thing is, like, you at least own it, and yeah, like I think sometimes taking a swing for it and having a hand like that is fine, particularly when you're taking at least aggressive actions to try and win the pot. So I can understand where you're going from with that. But
Yeah, I told a
let's
friend.
what's up?
I told a friend that I busted right after it happened, and he was like, "Well, did you at least go for it?" And I told him the hand. He's like, "Well, that's certainly going for it."
That's
Okay.
good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the heads up course on an upswing, because one of the things I found after I made it, I've gotten a lot of praise from people within the group or people that, I've talked one-on-one with. But, everyone's not itching to get out there and be like, it's amazing, guys, like, check it out. Because, like, the less people that are in there, obviously, the more value it has. But what was your experience like with the course? And do you think that it has, value in becoming a better player in other areas?
Yeah, I mean, the course was fantastic. I I would have found a way to prepare without it, but it would have been like a lot more challenging because I haven't really seen other material that sort of goes methodically, like position by position, and street by street into like what actions you should be taking with what parts of your range to actually be balanced. Most other study videos, like on Run It Once, sort of take a very discrete topic, and you don't get like the broad outline of how to play. Um, yeah, so I felt like it was a very easy way to learn sort of the basics of heads up in a pretty short period of time. I did it in like maybe a week and a half before the match was when I started to study.
That's a lot of videos to get through in a week and a half.
Yeah, it was a lot.
um,
And like, you know, actually working with them and like trying to understand the math, making sure that I understood what was going on. It was probably like 60 hours of stuff that week.
yeah, I tried to I guess actually one of the things at Upswing, we always try and make it more like a course rather than just like a video library. One of the things I think training sites have kind of been doing for a long time that's been a mistake, just having like a bunch of people just make a video every day, and then you just have like this like, huge library of videos, which like if you just want like, if you just want to consume videos in just pure, just quantity, that's fine. But, in actually getting like a structured learning environment, that's not really the best play. And I feel like training sites have just done that, and it's before your time, but training sites have done that because Card Runners was the first big poker training site. And that's what they did. They just had a huge library of videos, and they were a really successful company. So all the other training sites in general have kind of followed that model. You had a couple that didn't, but in general they did. And so we wanted to kind of take like a fresh, perspective with it and just start and go ground up. So like in that, there's going to be less in the course itself. There's less like, all right, we're going to talk about these board textures in this spot, really in depth like that. Because if you get too micro, you're just going to spend so much time getting bogged down in some of those spots that you can't get through everything, right? So I really tried to put like an emphasis on, okay, here's how the game tree works. Here's the parts of your range you should be looking to kind of throw in to balance out your strategy. A lot of theory stuff, a lot of like combo breakdowns, a lot of like understanding like, randomization in terms of which hand should be doing what actions. And just basically give like, if I was going to spend 30 hours teaching someone to become like as good of a player as possible, like what can I do? What can I do to make that course? And, I'm really happy with the way that it came out. And I think that the thought process there that you use from Heads Up, because that was my first game, right? Like that's how like I came up in poker. That's how I like, reached like high stakes. And then when you take that and then you apply it to other game types, I think it helps you a lot to kind of like streamline your thinking to be more consistent.
Yeah, I can for sure I can for sure see how it will be useful in game formats other than Heads Up. Just like the sort of methodical way of thinking about, especially c-betting strategy and what hands to be betting on which streets. Because, as I said, I've watched like, one-off videos from a number of sources on things like that, but never anything that sort of lays out what to do on each street with which parts of your range.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on then to talking about the match itself. So you arrived pretty close to the start of the match. I think originally you were going to play in some of the cash games, right?
Oh yeah, I was supposed to play in Friday's cash game, and then I couldn't make it down for it.
It was a great game. It was a great game. But so you arrived pretty close to the start of the match, and Mike played the night before. I can personally guarantee he was up very late playing poker because I was there. And so you showed up fresh. How were you feeling going into the match? What were you feeling at that point, and what were your just general thoughts then?
Right before the match started and the first like little bit of the match, I was feeling pretty nervous. Just about the experience of like playing in front of 10,000 people basically who were like watching everything that I did. But I sort of felt like I was able to forget that a little bit later on. I felt pretty confident going into the match that I was going to win. Like recognizing that that variance is high, I still thought that there was like a pretty low chance of me losing, because I didn't think that he would be very good on like the fundamentals of poker. And I also had like, I took the time to like watch tapes of him before the match, and uh, had like a bunch of live reads going into it that I thought were going to be reliable and help me make decisions. And I think those were incredibly useful.
Can we get a little taste of some live reads? I assume we've got some people in the chat. Maybe just one, or are they too valuable?
I mean, one that I saw people commenting on in Twitch chat during the match was how much more he talks when he had a strong hand. And I think you could also see like stuff like his bet sizing and timing was fairly obvious. Some of the less obvious stuff I think is kind of more important, but I don't want to give that
Yeah,
stuff away.
that's totally fair. Actually, that's something that I've seen really consistently in poker. I just have a general rule of if I'm in a hand, I'm just serious and I got my game face on, you know? So like I don't chit chat. If like you could like sit across the table from me and just like yell things at me and I would just not respond to you because I don't trust in myself. Like I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. And I'm not good at the whole like table banter back and forth.
Yeah.
In terms of like raw comedic value, I think I'm good. But in terms of playing poker while doing it, I just don't think I can do it in an unbiased way that I'm comfortable with. So I'll generally talk to people, but when I'm in a hand, I'm in a hand. And the thing that I see extremely consistently, and not always, but pretty consistently, when people have good hands, they're more chatty because, and I think it just like psychologically at some level, you're happier. You're gonna win this hand. You're gonna win some money. As a bonus, you can shit talk your opponent a little bit or like say whatever. It takes a lot more to have a bad hand and then just like start gloating, because you're calling attention to yourself. Like
Exactly.
when you're bluffing, like at a subconscious level, you don't want to do that.
Right. Yeah. If you have what you know is the winning hand, you can you feel like you're free rolling, like you do whatever, and the worst thing that happens is they fold. But if you're bluffing, you don't want to talk somebody into calling.
Yeah, there,
The
th-
tendency.
there was a hand on Friday, sorry, no, Saturday, where Jeremy Coughlin bet the river with 9 high. Sean D river trips and raised, and they were like, they were either 250 or 500 blinds deep. I forget if it was a straddle or not, but very very deep.
This is
And
like the only hand that I saw from
yeah,
that day.
and
Yeah.
and Jeremy ripped it in on him, and then after a little bit of tanking, gave a high five to the guy next to him, and then like berated Sean like in the hand like while
Yeah.
like bluff jamming. And I was like, man, that is strong. That is a
Yeah.
really strong play to make while going all in,
I agree. Yeah. I was really impressed by it. It's not something that like many pros can do, let alone many rec players. He did a lot of stuff that people rarely do when they're weak.
Definitely. And I think one thing that helps me in these spots, I generally don't put much weight on like that aspect. Like the way that my thought process works is like kind of create what I think is a good theory-based strategy, and then from there, if I have like some small reads in the way I think that they play, or maybe like a small like tell on something like that they're doing, I make a small change in my strategy towards that, but
Yeah.
only kind of on the edges, so that if someone does that kind of stuff and you're like, okay, he's clearly strong because who bluff rips 500 big blinds here on the river and gives someone a high five? I mean, who does that? I feel like I'm maybe a little more immune to that kind of stuff than most people. But that's kind of the classic argument that I feel like I've had like 10 times in the last couple of weeks of like the exploitative versus like the theory based style. Yeah, it's all interesting stuff. The live tell thing, you definitely can get an edge there. I'm not saying you can't, but it is a double-edged sword when you play people that kind of go the other way.
I think that it becomes more complicated when you are playing against people who understand live tells and can use fake tells. Um, I still think that with like study and practice, you can uh, sort out what is real and what isn't to like by no means with absolute accuracy, but with enough accuracy for it to be a benefit to your game. Um, and like there were a couple of hands in the match that like neither you or Sean liked. Like the two that you both agreed were bad, besides maybe the 5 deuce hand, were ones where I bet like fourth pair twice for value. And they were both spots where you guys were basically like, this is way too thin. You can't be betting this here. It must be a bluff. And those were spots where I just had like reads that I was really confident in that he had worse hands. And when you have that, you can like value bet a lot more thinly, obviously. But that was like the hand where I had 8-7 on queen.
I remember both of them. So they were a little bit different. One of them, you bet the flop with a hand that was something like 4-3 or 5-3 on a higher board texture, and you turned to 3. And then you barreled the turn. And that one I thought was way more reasonable.
That was Mike's.
Maybe that was Mike's. I remember the 8-7 one for sure. You bet 8-7 on ace 10-6 and you turned to 7. Or sorry, king 10-6.
Queen 10.
Okay.
Queen 10-6.
Queen 10-6. All right, so my argument here might even be though that, let's say that they have ace high. I'm not entirely certain that bet is still even the best line. Because if you check, there's some chance they turn it into a bluff. Admittingly less so with Mike, but there's some chance that they're going to turn it into a bluff. And additionally, I think you're more likely on average to get called if they want to hero you by taking a bet check bet line than taking a bet check line. Because if you check back the turn and they check the river and you bet, then they're not facing future bets. Whereas most people on the turn there with ace high would think, okay, so, am I really going to call here with a street left to act? How am I going to play rivers, basically? So I'm not totally sure that I agree that if they have ace high, that betting the turn still is the best line.
I can see the argument for that. In game, I was also concerned about the fact that there were a number of draws that I could also get some value from, and was planning to check back basically any river besides like a 7. But I can see the argument for that. My point is just when you're able to like exclude most hands that are better than yours with a high degree of confidence, your ability to value bet becomes a lot wider. Like you can do it with a wider range.
I think it's safe to say that if you're playing somewhere you can narrow them down to a weak hand on the flop when they call, they're going to have kind of problems no matter what turn line you decide to take.
Yeah.
So there's a couple hands here that I did want to talk about that I thought were particularly interesting, and if you have other ones you want to talk about as well, we can do that. So the first one that I thought was amazing, and I don't have the board written down here, but it was the hand where you had ace 7 and you had the ace of hearts, and you check called, I believe, jack 8 deuce. You check called a 7, completing the flush that gave you the nut flush draw, and then the river was a low brick, and you check raised all in. And Mike had, I believe, pocket 4s or pocket 5s. Yeah. I think pocket 4s.
5-4s. Yeah.
From just like a viewer standpoint, that was a really enjoyable hand just to kind of watch the whole thing go down. Because on the river, you thought you were bluffing and he was tanking, and I'm like, this could get really weird right now because if I don't think. I mean, there might have been some degree of posturing from Mike. He did a lot of tanking on rivers, but all in all, if I had to analyze the way that Mike played the river, I would say he definitely leaned on the stationy side. So I would not have totally ruled out a river call for Mike there. I wouldn't. Whether he should or not, well, he shouldn't, but I wouldn't have ruled that out. So we had almost quite possibly an epic value merge in the match. That would have been a hand for the books if that had happened. But anyway, do you want to talk a little bit about like what your thought process was in that hand? Why you selected a7 and the way that you saw that situation.
Yeah, it was a situation where he bet all three streets, and I felt on the river like I was not really going to be ahead almost ever because I didn't expect him to be value betting a worse hand than a seven, three streets. Uh, Having seen what he was doing now, I would be more inclined to just call, especially because his bet sizing was really small.
Yeah.
And in game, I was unsure whether I could just profitably call. I felt like he was going to have like a lot of eights that he was value betting, and just going a little bit thin on, and that I probably was not going to be ahead of many or any hands. Wrong about that. But so I thought my hand made a good bluff raise on the river because I obviously have the nut flush blocker. I also block, you know, 8-7, like a bunch of two pair hands and sets. And it was a pretty like, I don't remember exactly what the size of the pot was, but I think it was like a 1.5x pot shove or something. And I expected him to be folding a lot of hands to that. But
Yeah, what makes that hand weird, besides the hand Mike had, but what makes the hand weird, if you had faced a normal sized river bet, I would call the play like, good and standard. Obviously when you create a river check raise range, in any game, you want to be balancing out with hands that have the best blockers. And in general, blocking the nuts is the best hand to block, right? So, I see a lot of people that argue like, well, if they have any flush, they're going to call. Well, that's true, but blocking their strongest one is the most important. And then also when you have a kicker that's paired, you now block some of those two pair hands, which is also good. So it's a pretty natural selection, I think, for one of your best bluff candidates. The thing that was weird about the hand was you were facing a 1/4-ish pot river bet. It was a very small river bet. And so the question then kind of becomes like, does ace-7 have to call? And then, shift your bluffs downward towards like ace-3 or ace-deuce or whatever. But yeah, I think you played the hand well, and I don't really know what Mike was going for there on the river. Confusing bet.
yeah, I mean, I think that probably like if I were in that spot again against him in the future, I would just call. But in game, I just couldn't imagine that I was ahead of hands that he was trying to value bet three times. And so, and plus like ace-7 does block a few more value hands in terms of like two pairs than ace-3 would.
Definitely.
So yeah, I don't know what was right. It
Interesting
seemed
hand.
close. Yeah.
And then there's another hand where you had 8-4 and you check raised Mike on 7 deuce deuce. Can you talk a little bit about that hand? 8-4. Sorry, I said ace-4.
Yeah. That was a hand where, so two things were in play in that hand. And like my hand specifically wasn't really one of them. One was the fact that he was c betting way too much, in my opinion. He was c betting like almost 100%. And so his c betting range was too weak. And especially on like a board like that, he's just not going to have he's not going to have connected that often. And then also I had live reads that he was weak. And I felt like if I check raised the flop and then went bet, like there was very little chance that he was going to be calling down unless he improved, which I would probably also be able to tell. So it wasn't like my hand was the best bluff candidate, but it was the hand that I had in a spot where I thought that I could profitably bluff like almost any two cards.
You know, I actually, I'm like, wait. Hello? I started echoing. All right, no, I think we're good. That was weird. Um, 8-4 with the eight of spades there is actually like a little bit outside of what I'd want to check raise, particularly on seven deuce deuce where you're not going to have nearly as many deuces as you would in some other spots. And I think he raised 2.5x pre-flop too. I could be wrong. But one thing I will say that I think is important to note, and this is something that I learned along the way when playing people with weird pre-flop strategies. You know, there was a good chunk of folding and a good chunk of limping. And when players take that strategy, part of that is they get to c-bet more in raised pots because their overall raise range is much stronger than your call range than against like a traditional strategy. So I would say that while I agree with you, he c-bet too much, and I'm sure this was not what he was going for, but while he c-bet too much, if you do raise a smaller frequency and put, more hands in a fold or limp, you do get to c-bet more, and to be fair, in that hand, he had a relatively strong pre-flop hand. He had pocket fives, which, got absolutely owned the way the hand went down to bet on 7 deuce deuce and fold to a check raise. I think 8-4, I don't think it's like that outside of what a check raise strategy could be. I prefer hands like 9-8 or 8-6 with a spade. So you're still kind of like, it's still reasonable. It's not like you just had like 8-4 of like nothing and then just check raised,
Yeah.
All right. So are there any hands that you thought were interesting that you want to talk about? Anything from the match itself?
No, I guess one thing I would say is like, in general, like looking back over the match, I feel like I played pretty passively and like low variance. And I feel like against a different opponent, that might have been a mistake, but it was sort of like, it was a deliberate strategy against Mike, and I think made sense because I think that I had a pretty big edge on him, and the key for me was like minimizing variance so that I could realize that edge. And so there are some spots where I made like kind of tight laydowns, maybe too tight, but I felt like less inclined to sort of grind out those marginal hands, given how good my reads on him were and how many other mistakes he was making. So I did not exactly look like a world beater in the match, but I feel like my primary goal was to win.
Yeah.
And accomplish that.
That makes sense in situations where you have more edge. Passing on smaller edge opportunities makes sense. But I also will say, you said you played more passive and low variance right after the hand where you check raised 8-4 and 7 deuce deuce. So
yeah, but
there was certainly some aggressive moves mixed in there. I guess the main spots that I saw that you took like more passive lines were like with some of the draws that traditionally might be part of a check raise strategy. I saw a lot of just calling. The queen 3 of clubs. Where you called a turn probe and or maybe I think he might have led the turn. It was a weird hand, I think.
I bet flop, and then he probed turn.
Okay, yeah.
Like he check called flop and then bet turn.
And you floated a flush draw. River bricked for you. He checked and you bluffed. And he had like third or fourth pair. I can't remember exactly what he had. And then really wanted to call, but weird hand overall. I guess taking some of those low variance lines in spots where you think you have an edge does make sense, but it's also like a trap sometimes people get into, like, oh, I don't need to do this, I don't need to do that because like my edge is so big. But as you don't take those spots, your edge shrinks. So it's kind of like, I see what you're saying though.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, like an example was like the hand where I had Jack nine and flopped top pairs like nine six deuce, and then turn was a 10, bringing in a flush, and I folded to a relatively small bet, like maybe one third pot, and that's a spot where like I know it's right to call against like most opponents.
I
Um,
like the way that you worded that. That was
yeah. But like it was a hand where his his mannerisms were very strong. Like the live stuff was very strong. He was betting in the dark. He was talking a lot. He seemed very confident, and he had overcards in the nut flush draw. And like it was a spot where I still probably could have profitably called against him, but like there are just better spots. You know, if my goal isn't to just like, if we were playing infinite hands and I was trying to like maximize my win rate, that would be one thing. But like the freeze outs, I'm trying to like win the match, and I can be a little bit more selective. Um, so I didn't love that fold in retrospect, but
top pair on the flop's a good hand. Heads up,
I know,
it's
I
a good
know,
hand.
yeah. Uh, but like when you have like just endless pretty good spots.
Understandable. Also, his three bet frequency was pretty low. I'm not sure how much three betting really happened,
Yeah,
but
it's like 3 or 4 hands or something.
so more reasonable as well. All right, so one more question, and then I want to move into some fan questions because we got some good ones. My question to you: do you feel like if you were in Mike's seat, you would have still won the match? Because one thing that gets brought up a lot here, and there's no doubt about it. Mike definitely ran badly over the course of the match. He didn't really have many strong hands. He definitely bricked, definitely more than his share of draws and hands when he saw the flop. And he got put in some spots that, the question was, how much is he going to lose? I'm not saying that he played amazing. He played pretty poorly overall, but he definitely ran bad in terms of like just distribution. So do you feel like if you were in Mike's position that you would have still won the match?
I don't have like a confident opinion one way or the other. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that I would have lost, because I feel like he lost a lot of money in spots that I never would have lost money in.
That's definitely true.
And he failed to get value from his strong hands by being a tell box, and making it easy for me to fold. Um, and so I think that like, I did run well, but a lot of it was just like Mike owning himself. And I think there's a decent chance that I could have still won if the cards been reversed. I know that sounds like arrogant, but I just think that he like lost the most and won the least in almost every spot.
No, I think that's totally fair. But maybe I'm not the best judge of arrogant, right, guys? I get told I'm arrogant all the time, so seems fine to me. All right, let's move on to some fan questions. Now, this is one of my favorites. I asked Mike this 2 days ago as well. I want you to say one honestly nice thing about Mike as a person, and one honestly nice thing about Mike's poker game.
I guess my response would be like, why? I mean,
Why?
like, no, I mean, I can say I've heard that he's a good dad. But my experience with him as a person has been unfailingly negative and just like the worst possible. Um, and I haven't seen like a lot of good sides to him. He's entertaining, I guess, but like he's just been a complete horror show to me, and I don't really understand like the this is like a thing that happened in the election too, like force somebody to say something nice about their opponent. It's like I really, really
I
dislike
mean,
him.
you know what? There are people that like, you don't get along with sometimes. Like, I mean, for example, like me and Negreanu, we don't get along the best. But I can say that Negreanu is great for poker, and I think he's done a lot to like build the game and respect that still, even though I don't agree with a lot of what he says or does. Um, so you can still find something here. I'm gonna have to hold your feet to the fire on this question because Mike tried to wiggle his way out of it, and I had to bring him back. So one nice thing about Mike as a person, and one good thing about his poker game.
Okay. I will say, like, it matters who the other person is. I'm not just
I
resistant
know.
to
I
because
understand. I
yeah, I
understand.
have disagreements with other people and can still see that they're like not horrible people.
I think you can
Um,
find something.
well, like I said, I he seems to be a good father. And in terms of poker, he has had a very long career.
Wow. All right.
I'm
All right.
sorry.
That was some super backhanded stuff right there.
I know. I
um.
um
So you know what? All right. I think about Mike. Having met him and talked with him some, I will say that at least Mike, he talks a lot of shit, but he at least will show up and put his money on the line, in a public setting like
that's
that. As a person, he didn't just like back out and he could have. So, I respect that about him. And then, his poker game, he goes with what he thinks his reads are, and sometimes those are wrong, but Mike definitely does not play like cameras are there. He's playing his own game for sure. So those would be my two things, my take on it. All right, you kind of weaseled your way out, but we'll move on. All right, let's go with some other fan questions here. Um, Now, this question was asked before a little bit of an update, so maybe this is something we could talk about a bit as well. But will you accept the Bill Perkins 5K offer for tax returns to prove your 500K income? And then yesterday, you tweeted a picture of, I'm not exactly sure what kind of statement it was, but I believe it was from your last job that showed around 490 something thousand dollars in income. So does that mean you did take it, or did you talk with him privately, or do you have to show your actual tax returns? Because I think a lot of people are just like, why would you leave a 500K a year job to pursue poker?
okay. Well, that's several questions. I talked to Bill beforehand to make sure that that would be like enough evidence for him if I put it on Twitter. I just DM'd him and asked. The reason I didn't want to put my tax return on is because it would just be like more complicated. Like I had other sources of income during that time period, and I was also married, so it was like a joint tax return that I would have had to like try to break out and explain what portions of income were mine. And it just felt like invasive, and I wasn't really that eager to do it. But Bill was happy with this statement that I got from my firm, so it didn't matter. Um, uh, yeah.
Yeah, so Mike came in with a response to this, um, that he wrote up in like a note document, and I believe tweeted as well, that you never talked with him afterwards about it at all. Um, so what are your thoughts there? Do you think maybe you should have at least messaged him to say that you're going to take it, or do you feel like he's still like booked kind of no matter what, or like what are your thoughts there?
I just like nothing that I do is ever going to be sufficient for him. Like I was not enthusiastic about the idea when he brought it up on Sunday because it's very like reminiscent of Trump bullying techniques. Like I feel like he took it from the Obama birther controversy that Trump started. And it's really just like a way of baselessly attacking me and forcing me to provide proof of something when there's no evidence that I lied about it. And I find like that general process in public discourse to be like gross, and I don't want to be a part of it. Um, but like after I talked to a friend about it a day or two after the match, and he was just like, you should just do it so it won't be a talking point. And so I put it up. Like, I don't really expect him to pay because like, I mean, this is another reason why I didn't want to take the bet until Perkins offered money as well. Like, he'll always find some reason why it's not good enough, why it's not real. And like, nothing that I do or say is going to change that. So he can go fuck himself. But like, if anybody, like, he will not hopefully be able to say that I'm a liar now without people pointing out that I've provided evidence. So there's that at least.
I mean, I guess I would just say, like, in this situation, you know, what I would have done anyway, I feel like if people say they're going to put up money, I would at least, like, message them kind of one-on-one to be like, just so you know, I'm going to take you up on this now. So that way, like, you know, if you do provide it, then it's like they clearly lose, you know, and then they know they're going to lose. I feel like if you don't say anything directly to them and then you provide it, it's a little more ambiguous because, you know, you never specifically said to them that you were taking the bet. I think it's a little bit more of I think it's a little bit of a gray area kind of in that regard. Obviously, I lean towards like your side because you did prove it and you did say it, so it makes sense to me. But at the same time, not like confirming a bet as booked with someone kind of opens up some new doors for, you know, potential issues.
I mean, like, legally, he had an open offer and I accepted it by doing the thing that he asked me to. I'm confident as a former contract lawyer that like that would be legally binding. And I just didn't want to have anything to do with him. Like, I didn't want to contact him. I don't think that he will ever pay regardless of what I did. And so I don't need the headache of having to talk to him.
All right, fair. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is a question that I thought was interesting as well. So since you started poker, what has your general poker training regimen consisted of for the last 2 to 3 years? Any advice to people on poker learning as someone that's new to the game?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's anything really special about the way that I've gone about it. I study a fair amount. I tend to go through like phases of intense study when I'm home, and then I do a lot less when I'm traveling, which has been a lot lately. But, you know, like, I took a month off last year and better part of a month off this year to do nothing but study. And like, I will just sit and study 12 plus hours a day and treat it like I would studying for law school or preparing for a case or something, and just try to like treat it like any other job, because it is a job. It's a job that I really enjoy. And so I feel very fortunate that I get to do it for a living. But you don't get to do that if you don't work really hard on it. So basically, like, a lot of my study is just training videos, done some on Upswing even before this, and then also Run It Once. I watch a lot of their content.
Whoa. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
They've got good stuff, by the way. They have good stuff.
There are also some books that I found like really helpful that were very like Janda's book, Chen's book, the books that are like less focused on specific strategy and more focused on the math of the game and thinking about how to build ranges, because that's stuff that doesn't really like get stale as quickly as strategy books, you know? So a lot of the studying has been just like going through those texts and like making sure that I really understand them, which is time consuming.
Matthew Johns' book, just to cut off for a second here, but Matthew Johns' book, Applications of No Limit Hold'em, I think actually the best poker book that I've ever read. I would actually attribute a lot of my success to that book. I remember reading that book, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, kind of when I was on the way up. And I remember just like reading something like, my God, why had no one ever told me this before? Like I had no idea this even existed, and learning a lot of those concepts. So that I think that's like by far the best book you can read if you want to get better at poker. And Chen's book, Mathematics of Poker, you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not like that was too much for me.
It was a
I
little bit too much for you
I
too.
tried and I was like, damn, there were formulas. Like I got into poker to not have to do this shit. Like, and this is like way too much going on.
Yeah. I mean, Janda's is the less mathematical of the two, and it uses calculus. They're like pretty dense texts. But yeah, like Janda's book, I think, fundamentally changed the way that I saw the game, and I would recommend it to anybody.
Awesome, yeah. So those are your main ways of learning then, because I think a lot of people when they try and approach poker like learning, I get these messages all the time. Doug, so you say it's important to study, so like what do I do? And I get that message all the time. So when you started out, what besides just consuming that content, like how would you study it? How would you apply it into your game? Because a big problem a lot of players have, they read something or they watch something and then they never find a way to actually apply it into their game.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I do is when I'm watching a video, I will take notes on all of the important points. And then at the end of each day or week, depending on how much I'm studying, I'll go back and review all of my notes and create a digest of the important points and think through how I'm going to apply each of the most important things I've learned to my game, to make sure that I'm not just hearing it but not actually internalizing it or applying it to my game. And yeah, the other thing that I would say is that obviously talking about hands with players that are better than me has been absolutely critical for me. Yeah, Charlie Carroll and Ben Heath, I feel like my game has improved significantly in the last 9 months that I've been friends with them, because they are better than me and I'm learning a lot. And it's when you find people who are better than you and who are still willing to talk strategy with you, it's such an incredible gift. And you have to do everything you can to foster that and be open to all forms of criticism. I think that people, a general tendency that I see is people will ask me about hands who aren't as good as I am. And I'll give them feedback and they'll get really defensive about it. And I'm guessing that is pretty common. It's just a human tendency to not want to be wrong.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. And I think that if you can overcome that tendency, it's a huge benefit to your game.
I've done a lot of coaching and staking in the past. Before I started Upswing, I actually have a lot of experience just coaching in general because I had a tournament stable, I had heads up stable, I had six max. I've kind of been through all the game types like that. So I don't even know how many people I've coached in a more one-on-one or maybe with a group of 5 people setting. But one thing I've always found when in terms of how well my students did, the people that were all right, Doug, I'm going to listen to what you have to say and I'm going to apply these concepts and you know what, I trust you because you've done well for yourself. Those people just always ended up doing better than there's 10 or 20% of people that I'll have the hands right in front of them, right? And I'll be okay, so you made a mistake here. And well, that was a month ago and my game's totally different now. It's no, you're missing the point. It doesn't matter that this was a month ago. Do you think I care that you messed up the turn here? I don't care. But and they're no, but the thing was this guy, and then it's just look, you're missing the point here. I'm spending my time to try and teach you concepts. I'm not mad at you. I'm not berating you for you playing this hand wrong. You misplayed it, but let's talk about why and let's learn from it. And one thing that always helped me, even though people like love to say that I have an ego in poker or whatever, but when I was learning heads up, I always, when I would play someone, I would always try and look at their strategy from like a neutral perspective. What do I think about these aspects? What do I think about those aspects? And like, my honestly, on the way up the ladder, I just, stole strategies that my opponents were using that I thought were
Yeah.
good. I remember the first time that there was like a 3 spade board and I was playing against Alex Miller, who's Kanu 7 online. And he just like just ripped in a huge amount, and I think it ended up showing down that he had the ace of spades. And I was like, wow, why would he risk like 20K to win 1K or whatever, or 10K to win 500 or whatever it was? And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, oh, okay, so he's blocking the nuts, and I get a worse price to call. And if he does it with these hands, I started putting it together. I'm like, oh man, this is really smart. This is a really well balanced strategy. And so I started doing that because like that was superior to like what I was doing beforehand. And there's no shame in being like, this guy figured out a smarter version of a part of the game than I did. I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
There was another part of my game where like Ben Solsky first popularized this strategy where on turns that were favorable for you, in the big blind after calling the flop, you'd lead out a 4th pot. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense because, this card's good for your range, doesn't really hit their range, and it gives you like more options in the big blind to develop like a simplistic leading strategy. So I started doing that. And basically like, I always had things that were specifically my style that I felt good about, that I felt were stronger than the field. But in areas that I thought that I was weaker, I would just take what they were doing and just try and do, the best version of that I could do to become a good player. And that's how you should approach learning in anything. That's how you should approach life in general and things you want to get good at. Don't just have this chip on your shoulder that you're, great and don't have to listen to anyone because you're the best. Even if you're near the top or at the top, still keep an eye on the strategies that people are using around you to learn, because the world's a constantly changing place. And if you want to try to maintain being, one of the best or become one of the best, you're going to have an open mind in the way that you try and learn.
Yeah, I think that like one other thing that's been a real benefit to me is the fact that there are exceptions, but in general, I think I'm a lot more tuned in at the table than most pros are, meaning like I'm paying attention to every single hand. I'm not on my phone. And I'm trying to like think about, when a good player is in a hand, I'm trying to like think about what hands they might be taking this line with, and then using what hand they show down as like to check my assumptions about how they're playing, and also like think about what I would do with different types of hands in their spot. And I think it's also like really useful even against worse players to like, because so much of live poker is just like figuring out how to exploit big glaring imbalances that people have. And like, those aren't things that you want to emulate, but they're things that are like tend to be consistent across populations, if you like break it down into certain demographics. And so it can teach you how to play against people of that type in the future. And like live reads is a part of it too. But yeah, I just say that like I'm actually engaged in paying attention most of the time that I'm at the table, and I see a lot of people just like on their phones.
Right, on Twitter, on whatever. Yeah, it can it can be hard to really to be in the zone there paying attention for a long time. I find like typically if I sit down at a table, the first like half an hour or 45 minutes, I'm like really engaged. And then an hour or two goes by of like me kind of thinking about what's going on. And then it becomes less interesting and harder to really stay focused on that stuff. Then it kind of becomes like, when a big pot is developing, you like tune back in a little bit. So yeah, that's a good skill set to have to try and stay focused. And I think if you approach it like that, like you're approaching it like I'm gonna do my best to like see what's going on here, rather than I'm just here to play, and I'm gonna just like play hands occasionally, be on my phone, whatever. You can definitely improve your win rate by taking better focus, having more focus on what's actually happening at the table. So
Yeah. And I think also like one last note I would say
sure,
is that I've noticed a general tendency among poker players to, if they see somebody play like one or two hands badly, to just like write somebody off as a shit player.
definitely.
And I feel like people who do that are like giving up a lot of, like, I can think of specific players where people will say like, oh, he's shit. I saw him play this hand and it was just terrible. It's like, but I've played with this guy before and I've seen him do like good things. And if I were to just like write him off as a bad player, I would stop like paying attention to what he's doing and stop learning things from him. And like for most people who have been successful, there are going to be things that they are doing well, especially if there are things that they are doing not well. You know, you need
Yeah,
something
definitely.
to balance it out.
Yeah, I actually think that when you see a really bad hand, it's kind of on a scale. Sometimes I see a hand and I'm like, okay, this was ambitious. Um, I don't really agree with what they did here, but I can kind of see what they're going for. And then sometimes there are hands that need to be like, what was going on there? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like the whole hand. I'm just like, I don't understand what you did pre. I really don't understand what you did in the flop. Turn is like maybe the best street, but it's still bad. There are hands where like people get like way out of line. And maybe it's because they get too focused on individual element rather than the overall hand.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I see that I most see in poker that I think it is just incorrect. A lot of people have this thing where if they see a hand showdown and it's not how they would have played it, they'll be, oh, well, he had Queen Jack there. And it's just like, okay, well, are you just LOLing because you would have like played pre differently or flop? Like, let's think about what they did, okay? Pre-flop, okay, that could be reasonable. Flop, maybe he wants to have some of these kinds. You know what I'm saying? They don't break down like all the lines that were actually taken to try and like figure out what the strategy is. They just like jump on the LOL train and like laugh with their friends because they all know that they would call there, but the guy raised. And I see a lot of that in poker, which is
Yeah.
that kind of group think is just not. It's not good for developing your game, and oftentimes like the hand probably on average is not a great play, but can have some things about it that are good.
Right. It's just like if you're focused on just like labeling hands or players as good or bad, you're not really like getting anything out of that. Whereas if you think like, okay, I didn't agree with this play, let me think about like why he might have done it. Um, Sometimes you'll discover that you're missing something and that's useful. And often you'll at least discover like an assumption or a tendency that you disagree with that can be generalized for other hands. And I think that if you just like see a hand and think, well, that was shit, you are really not making the most of that information.
Definitely. All right, so let's move on to one or two more fan questions, and then we got a few other topics I think we want to talk about. Um, General thoughts on Queen Five.
I think it's a top 10 hand, obviously. I
Oh
really,
man.
okay, because like my thing has now become I am the ace 10 offsuit person and I have to
Yeah.
like hear jokes about this. I think the fact that Mike played two disastrous hands
Yeah,
with
that's
queen
fair.
five off, that should just be his hand from now on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I could be wrong, but I have a feeling Mike is not going to live the Queen Five offsuit meme down. That is going to be Mike's hand for some time here. But one more actual question. Got a couple I could pick from. Um, this one's actually kind of topical. You said something about it already, but I'll just ask this one. Do you have any regrets about the entire experience other than the way that you originally handled it on Twitter?
Um, I regret the stuff with tipping. Uh, that was like, for people who aren't aware of it, I was not aware that I was expected to be paying the dealers at the end of it. I thought that it would be like part of the costs of producing the show, and given how much I'd like paid out of pocket to participate in it, I really felt like it was reasonable for the show to be paying the dealers. But I handled it in pretty much the worst possible way, and kind of like that debacle sort of marred a really good experience for me and sort of left me feeling embarrassed and like not wanting to really be out in public even for several days after the fact. Yeah, so I wish that I had just like
Well,
actually just clarified that of my
right.
own initiative early on. And I think part of it is just like me and Glance really do not get along very well. And we've been sort of like increasing friction over the course of this. And him being the point person to talk to me about that was not like a great idea, I think, on the show's part, because the conversation would have evolved really differently if somebody who I didn't feel hated me was the one talking to me about it. But like, I really take responsibility for what happened. I just like actually handled it in the worst possible way, and I was embarrassed by it.
I think when that went down, because as someone that like, just watching the whole thing unfold, um, I think it was just kind of like a series of things compounded there. You know, First off, on TV poker, and this is, I mean, stuff I said to you as well, but on TV poker, especially in America, the players have always tipped. That's always been the tradition. I think the biggest thing that you could take away here is that, or that people could take away here is that this was a unique situation. You have a heads up grudge match. Lights, cameras, everything on you. I could totally see forgetting to tip in that scenario. You're not tipping after hands, right? It's a freeze out.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really think that there's any shame in having forgotten to do that. I think that could happen to anyone. It's easy to like berate somebody for not tipping when you're like, oh, you got to, and you should tip. I'm not saying you shouldn't tip, but in the moment, I think that could happen to anyone. I think that the correct move afterwards, like you kind of got attacked on Twitter and then fired back at them, and I think that from Poker Night America's standpoint, they just didn't want to look bad. When you say Poker Night in America said they'd take care of it, and then they didn't say that, then I feel like they don't look good because it's turning into a game of like who should tip the dealers when the dealers didn't get tipped, and like I think the play in general there when someone like attacks you for that is just to be like my bad, like it was a lot going on, the spotlight was on me, and that's extremely reasonable. It's extremely reasonable to say that like I forgot and I'm gonna make it right here and we're gonna move on.
Yeah, I just want to like my initial tweet response to that. I want to put that in context. So first, I genuinely believed that the show was paying the dealers. I did not have an adequate basis for that, and I take responsibility for that. But like, I genuinely did not think that the dealers were being stiffed at the time that I sent that message. And I've gotten like every time that I've appeared on the show before. So first of all, we've had a discussion at the beginning with the producers about how the dealers would be compensated. That didn't happen this time. But I've also pretty much every time I've been on it gotten tweets like that from people who just like see the stream and see you not like tipping the dealers out of pots. And so I wanted to respond and say like, sort of in line with what I've done in the past, and said like, no, that was like handled separately. But I was like tweeting it from a train station. I chose words that were like not intended to be misleading, but were misleading in effect. And things just sort of snowballed from there. Because there's like so much ill will between me and Glance, honestly. But like, yeah, I botched it, the whole thing from start to finish.
All right, well, at least you take responsibility for that. That says a lot. All right, so let's move on and talk about at least one or two other things here that I know you wanted to talk about. Let's start off with talking about the GPI award for Female Player of the Year. Earlier this year, Cate won Female Player of the Year by being the highest ranking female player, and then we did a video on it here on the channel, so a lot of you guys probably already seen it. But I did a response video where I kind of made fun of Cate because she was saying, this award, she basically accepted the award, but then said it shouldn't be an award because basically it's, kind of demeaning to women that they should have their own award. So do you want to maybe expand on, your position on that and your general take?
Yeah, so my general take is just that I think that it's silly to have a separate category for women, because it sort of presupposes or gives the impression that women are not capable of competing with men. Um, and I think that there are some counter arguments to that. But like in general, counter arguments to these types of things tend to be that they increase the visibility of women in the game, and so it has good effects. I'm kind of like suspicious of how good a justification that is in the case of this award, which is like really only targeted toward the top female pros anyway. It's not like a big visible thing. But so my general stance is that I don't really think that there should be a separate category for women. Even if that means like women having less visibility, even if it means them never winning player of the year, I think that that's probably better than having a separate category for them. I initially planned to turn down the award and then had a conversation about it with somebody whose advice I trust quite a bit and judgment. And he sort of said that like he thought it would be unnecessarily confrontational and like a slap in the face to the poker awards and GPI to like make a show of turning down the award. And I sort of felt like that at the time. Like I didn't need to like it was actually just like a little bit too attention seeking and like
But it was going to be that either way.
What?
It was going to be like that either way. I mean, even if
Yeah,
you
yeah, but like just like I didn't want it to be so acrimonious. Like I wanted to be nice to the people who were trying to give me an award, while also like still making my points. And like in retrospect, it might have been better to just turn down the award because that became a focus after the fact. And I think if I could do it again, I would have done that. But I just tried to like make a judgment about what was going to be perceived publicly best. And I make mistakes sometimes.
Well, by the way, I'm on your side of the fence here, and I said that in the video I did that I agree with you. It is, it belittles women to say, oh, you guys have your own award because you guys are good too, and it's just like, poker's a game of intelligence, like
Yeah.
it doesn't really make that much sense. I do understand where the people are coming from in trying to promote the game for women. I also do have my doubts as to like, I mean, let's start off by saying this. I mean, most people don't even know about the American Poker Awards. I didn't know that it was even a thing really until about a year or two ago. And I played poker for a decade. I didn't even know about it. So I think that most people don't even know about it. So how much reach is that award really getting? How are random women getting brought into poker by this small awards show? Kind of like I'd call it like an industry awards show. How is that bringing women in? I don't really see how that even works.
Yeah.
And then also my other problem in general with just those awards, obviously someone's gonna be like, Doug, you're just mad because you didn't get nominated for anything. But they're definitely a lot of people kind of patting themselves on the back, like you're doing a great job. No, you're doing a great. Like everyone's just patting each other on the back and just like giving each other awards and smiling about it. And it's like I worked really hard last year. I basically did content like all year. I didn't even get nominated in anything. I just got the brick. So I guess when I look at those awards, I wonder like how serious they are in general. How much reach those awards really have. And if you want to like stand up and make your point, I don't see why you should feel like it'd be a slap in the face for them to decline the award when you're still going to accept it and then basically go up there and talk shit about their award anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that argument. And in retrospect, I think it was probably a better move to turn down the award. but like all you can do is make the best guess about how your actions are going to be perceived and try to do what you think is right. And you make mistakes sometimes.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Um, okay, so we talked about the tax returns. All right, so there's one more thing you said to me right before we went on the air that you wanted to talk about today, and it was when Mike came into the booth during the stream and said that, to paraphrase, and I don't want to misquote Mike, but something along the lines of, you don't realize how much luck has played a role in your career. So what did you want to talk about specifically, and what were your general thoughts there?
Yeah, this is like something that I've heard from people before too. Like a criticism that I get a fair amount of is that I think that I'm better at poker than I am, and I don't recognize how well I've run in my career. Um, and I think that like I think that that's like extremely unfair, and it's a criticism that bothers me because I feel like I've gone out of my way to sort of an absurd degree to, in like every interview I've ever done, say my results are first and foremost about luck. I didn't deserve the results that I had.
Other
My
than
first,
today with Mike.
um, and like I don't think that I think that I'm a lot more clear-eyed than most, honestly, about like what the source of my success has been. And that's part of the reason why I like have continued working hard and have worked actually much harder since I had like good early results. Um, is to try to like earn retroactively the results that I had and to not sort of mistake that for actual skill, because like if you go back to the five diamond that I five table or that I final tabled a year ago, like I played pretty poorly that tournament. Like I can see so many hands that I misplayed now. And I get that. Like I get that a lot of my results have been luck based and that I make a lot of mistakes. And I don't think you'll ever hear me say that I'm a good poker player. Like I say that I've improved. Um, there's still like a huge gulf between me and the best players. And I try to like decouple emotionally um, the results that I've had from the work that I've put into them, because I don't think that there's much of a correlation.
Well, I think generally, in tournament poker, one of the blessings and the curse and a curse in that game type, you have to run extremely well to reach a level of success that people are going to recognize. People don't recognize like, oh wow, they've put together a solid string of reasonable cashes. No one ever says that, right? It's what did you win? What hot streak are you on? It was the OMG Fedor last year. It was the OMG Dan Coleman a couple of years before that. And like that, those are the stories, right? It's the who runs the hottest and then gets recognition from that. And then the question of like how much is luck versus skill or whatever. So, part of that game type when you look at large fields where you have to be very lucky to make deep runs just in general is going to be your results, whether you're good or not, are going to be luck based. I won a bracelet last year in a total shit show event. That was almost entirely luck. I played well, but I mean, 900 people in like a, you know what I'm saying? Like that type of stuff is primarily luck. So I think it's important when you look at that game type to understand that relative to some other game types. As far as you specifically, I haven't seen really one way or the other personally. I haven't like gone through and seen like was she like thankful for her luck in all of her interviews or not. I mean, I have better things to do, but as long as you recognize that like it's not a personal thing, it's like the game type itself. There's going to be a lot of luck, variance involved.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I get it. Like that's in my heart of hearts. I understand that I've gotten really lucky in my career, and I'm trying to do what I can now to earn the success that I've had. But I'm just not. I don't think I'm mistaken at all about like how I am compared to other players, and how much work I still have to do.
So the last thing I want to talk about while we're on that subject, there was a comment you made at the GPI where you said that if you had gotten into the game 5 or 10 years ago, that you have no doubt you'd be, one of the top or the top player in the world. I don't want to misquote you, but it was something along those lines. And I felt like that was a little bit. I think that wasn't fair to a lot of the people that are currently some of the best players in the world, because there are many people that come in and say like, "Oh, I'm like the hot shit. I'm gonna be number one. I'm gonna do all these things." And in poker, we've got a very long list of people that came in, thought that, ran hot for a bit, and then like where are they today? We don't even know. So do you feel like maybe that was a little bit too strong to say? Don't you feel like, especially in a game type that is more luck based, that making that statement is not only going to be like impossible to prove, but then also unfair to the people that have been working hard to be at the top?
I mean, I think it was a little bit unfair. That what I said was in part like a rhetorical device to because like my point in the speech was there's no reason that I should be in a separate category. And so the basic intent was to say I am capable of competing with these people. I don't need to have like a separate category where I'm just competing with like people that are perceived as worse. I think that I could have phrased it better, but I part of the point was to be like a little bit confrontational so that it would have like an emotional effect on people and they would internalize what I was saying. And I realized that it didn't come off that great to some people. I I do think that it could be like a little bit disrespectful because there are some great players who have been working very hard for 5 or 10 years. Um, I think that like my basic point is one that I actually stand by, which is that if I'd been playing for 10 years, I would be one of the best in the world. And I mean, it sounds kind of arrogant, I know. But like, I have the mathematical ability, I have the work ethic, I have the sort of like intuitive. I mean, I'm not the best intuitively, but I have some of that, and I work really hard. I'm good on like the live reads. I think that I'm like pretty elite at that stuff. Um, and as compared to my game, which is just like very spotty. But like, I think that if I had a bunch of time, I would be really one of the best. And I just think that I have like the right mix of personality traits to do that. It's I shouldn't have said that I could beat anybody because I certainly don't know that. And you made the fair point that like a lot of the really, really exceptional players in the game right now are people that haven't been around for 10 years. They've come onto the scene in the last 5 years. And I overstated my case and I'm not that confident about it. But like, my point is just like, I don't need a separate category. I can really compete with the men. I believe in myself. And maybe I should have picked a slightly different phrasing so that that message wouldn't have got lost.
Well, I think overall I agree with you, and you know what, I do think you are a good poker player. I've seen, a decent amount of your play. Obviously, you make mistakes. I think a lot of people make mistakes. Whether you're going to be able to make that step from becoming a good poker player to becoming a great one, kind of remains to be seen. It also, at least for me, it's going to matter how much time you continue to spend. Poker is fun right now, right? It's only been a couple of years. Where are you in 7 years? Are you still enjoying it to the same degree you are now? You strike me as someone that if you're not enjoying it, you're probably going to want to pursue other avenues. So I think there's still a decent amount of stuff that you need to accomplish in your career, which is going to include running hot and winning a big event. That's I think whether it should or not, and it shouldn't, but the bottom line is winning big events is important for the way people perceive how skillful a player is. And until you've won some, a reasonably significant event, I think that in a lot of people's minds, you're not as good of a poker player. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. It 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 kills me a little bit that I've had so many like fifth place finishes. Like I've just had I've had so many of them, and it's nice to have like a lot of final tables, but I've only gotten heads up once in my career.
Twice now.
And yeah, I I think that like that probably gives people the impression that I'm not capable of closing it out. And to be honest, that was really fair. Like at the time of the Five Diamond last year, I didn't understand final table strategy at all. But I feel like I'm there now, and could do it. So it would be, I hope that I still have like more opportunities and can accomplish that. It's hard to win a poker tournament, but
It definitely is. So yeah, Cate, thank you for joining us here today. I think we kind of made it through everything that we wanted to talk about. If you have any closing thoughts, anything you wanted to talk about that we missed, or anything you want people to hear, now is a good time to do so.
um, the only thing that comes to mind is that the I was a little bit disappointed with the amount of money that our charities raised on stream, and want to encourage people to consider donating, even though it's no longer a competition. I think the Committee to Protect Journalists is doing really important work right now, and yeah, it's just a fantastic organization, and I hope that people will consider directing some of their giving that way.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Cate. And to everyone, I'm going to be streaming on Twitch tomorrow at 2 p.m. PST. If you like micro stakes games, this is going to be for you. I'll see everyone tomorrow, and thank you for tuning in to hear Cate Hall. All right. That's it. We're good to go.
Good.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I'm going to press stop.